And I'm glad that we can start nearly punctual with our opening session. This opening session is meant to shortly describe the challenges, what is at stake, where do we stand, and then we go into workshops this morning, and we'll have lunch right around the corners here. And after lunch we will have 2 short sessions of half an hour each, where a lot of short presentations will be presented everywhere. This will require a little bit of discipline. I'll be talking about this later on, and then we'll have another round of rather longer afternoon workshops, not without coffee, of course, and we'll have a concluding plenary session before we then jointly move to the Austrian embassy, which will be a little walk from here that we can probably just do together. We are here in the representation of the state of Thuringia. And the state of Thuringia for quite some time was the first GMO-free member of the club of GMO-free regional governments. Unfortunately, due to all kinds of obligations, nobody from the Thuringia government is available this morning. It's an interesting development. When they joined the GMO-Free Regions Network, it was what we call a big coalition between Christian Democrats and Social Democrats. These days, some of you may have heard it, Thuringia is famous because it has the first local president from the left after Mr. Honecker. So, and there was quite a bit of discussion, is this acceptable and or not, and are they already democratic or not? Everything works very well. It is a coalition of the Social Democrats, who are the junior partners there, the Greens and the left. And it is my pleasure now to introduce to you an old friend in arms on the GMO issue, who now happens to be a minister of the state of Rhineland-Palatinate, sorry, which is especially famous for its vineyards that go back to Roman times. And Ulrike Höfgen is the Minister for Agriculture there. And I had the chance to see her talk to the farmers a couple of times. She does it perfectly well. She is trained as an agronomist, and she has been working in international agricultural development. And for a very long time, she was the speaker of the Green Group on GMO issues here in the German Bundestag. And so I am glad to have you here with us, and thank you for coming, despite the tight schedule everybody has these days. And please, Ulrike, give us the introduction for today. Thank you.
Good morning. Many thanks to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to kick off this conference with an opening speech. And it's true, I have followed with great interest the development of the European network of GMO-free regions since its foundation in 2003, first as member of the German Parliament and now as minister of one of the German Länder. This is one of the 16 federal states of Germany. And this has also been the phase of the most intense debates in Germany about agricultural genetic engineering. In 2004, The Red-Green coalition, this was a coalition of Social Democrats and our Green Party in the Bundestag, the national Bundestag, amended the genetic engineering law, including important achievements such as strict liability and a location register. These rules are in place up to date. So far, there is no cultivation of genetically modified plants in Germany and in most EU member states, at least not for commercial use. We owe this to the resistance of consumers, farmers, environment and consumer NGOs, and not at least to organizations like this network of GMO-free regions in Europe. The cultivation of the GM maize MON 810 was banned in Germany in 2009 and is banned in many other EU countries. This is due to scientific evidence that the toxin produced by the MON 810 may harm also beneficial organisms. And while the GMO potato Amflora was authorized by the European Commission for cultivation, it turned out to be a useless non-seller. At the moment, the EU member states are to implement the so-called opt-out rule. I'm curious which solutions will be developed in other countries, and I assume that this will also be of high interest for the conference participants. Germany now, the Federal Ministry for Agriculture has meanwhile tabled a first draft for implementation. In my opinion, this will lead to a patchwork of different rules in the Länder and our regions, and the farmers who want to produce GMO-free will face more bureaucracy, higher costs, and an uncertain basis for planning ahead. And I'm very pleased that my counterparts, my colleagues minister in other Länder, are also of this view. Many of you remember from the opt-out discussions in Brussels the aspect how to identify legally certain reasons for national cultivation bans, also in light of international competition law. As these questions are not easy to answer, I commissioned a study together with the other Green Ministers for Agriculture of our Länder, and we expect results of the study within a few weeks and are positive that the answers of the scientists will help us in the future process for implementing the opt-out rule. Important is, we want a nationwide cultivation ban in Germany in order to prevent ecological dumping. And I think this is really important that we support this goal. Other questions? I remember the bad decision of the EU Commission concerning the honey directive. I think this is a part of Christoph 10, and I think also in this case we have a lot of discussions to have. Most important is we want to achieve at last that the requirement for the EU-level authorization procedure will be tightened, especially in order to assess environmental impacts more intensely than so far. In any case, free trade agreements such as TTIP must not lead to a lowering of standards. We must hold on to the principle of zero tolerance for handling GMOs and continue to fight against attempts of the EU to define legal thresholds for GMO contamination in seeds or food. And with a new proposal of the Commission, EU member states shall be enabled to prohibit not only the cultivation on their territory, but also the use of imported GMOs for food and feed use. This approach is to be welcomed in principle because it would really affect the markets. But it also bears the risk of fragmentation between the member states even more than in the case of an opt-out for cultivation, and by no means made a lowering of standards in GMO law. Finally, I would briefly address to the topic of biopatents. Now we all should start again to advocate for a revision of the EU BU patent directive, and I think this will be an important goal we all should support. As you see, there is still a lot to do, despite successes so far. I'm very happy that so many committed experts and activists from many countries will discuss solutions at this conference. Thank you for your attention.
Very much, Ulrike. We take pride in not being a local European conference this time, especially the NGO section really spreads around the world, and so we have been looking for somebody to give us something like a global overview of the situation. And I think we were really lucky to have Jokling, who is heading the Third World Network out of Penang in Malaysia, to give us an overview on where we stand in the different parts of the world. And we will realize that here in Europe, where some of us had already thought about calling this the final round on GMO-free regions, because nothing happens, no fun, no sporting challenges on GMOs over the past 5 years or so, we will realize that when we look at the big picture globally, which Jokling will now give us, the situation is actually quite different. Please, Jokling, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Benny. It's such a pleasure to be back in Berlin, which I like, but really with this crowd, and some people I just saw last week in Ottawa, and it's really exciting. I want to say that really it was the struggles and some of the victories of the European activism back in the early 90s that actually inspired us in Third World Network to hold a meeting back in 1994. We were told by many people, well, genetic engineering is over. Especially some of our really good scientist friends, they said, everybody knows that science is wrong, it's bad, it's over. Now we're going to move to holistic solutions to health and agriculture and food security. But we said, I don't think so, because the battle is only beginning in many parts of our world, because there was just no knowledge. We had no idea what was happening, and we had, and for us in Asia, being the sort of the recipient of the Green Revolution and the hybrid rice varieties, for so many years it was seen as a success. And sure enough, in the first few years, we had huge increases in productivity and yield of rice, but it was that one crop, and nobody measured the loss of the biodiversity and all the food and nutrition that went to replacing very diverse systems of farming with one crop. And of course, very soon, it leveled off, and then it started going down, and we know the story of that. So what we did back in 1994 was really to invite scientists and activists, a lot of them from Europe, some from North America, to sort of learn what is this thing called genetic engineering? What is the science of it? And what is happening? And it was very mind-blowing. First of all, nobody could tell us what is a gene, let alone what genetic engineering is supposed to do. But it really opened up an awareness that we have so much to learn. And I think this is one of the most important lessons in the last few years. And we have, I think, come a long way. And I'm glad this workshop is called NGOs and Scientists. I think this is probably a big area of work that shows how important it is to bring together the scientific knowledge, the rigor of good science without conflict of interest, plus the activism of NGOs, not just to campaign, but to go really deep into understanding the science and the policy and the laws. Science and policy and laws that are out there, that are being made, and not to wait until it just comes into our face and we're just doing firefighting. A lot of our work is still firefighting. There's no doubt about that. But really what is also exciting is that we have seen the whole explosion on agroecology, organic farming, not just in terms of small, good examples around the world, but that we have even gotten to the level of the FAO, having, a very small part of the FAO, but nevertheless holding serious conferences, coming up with reports saying that small farmers, biodiversity, agroecology, that's the way we have to go. There is no choice. And we know for a fact that more than 70% of the world is being fed by small farmers and farmers' varieties. And then what we look at, so when we shift our lens and look at the big agribusiness, and I won't go into all the numbers, you are very familiar with it, the concentration of agribusiness, the concentration of the seeds in the formal seed sector is enormous in the hands of 5 to 6 companies. And we know all of them very well. But that concentration is certainly the reality for that part of the business. But it is a very dangerous part of the business because it's no, and I'm really glad that the last speaker brought up the fact that the fight over patents and intellectual property is not over. Because we see in the field of medicines, we see in the field of seeds that there is much, much more aggression in terms of finding new ways to have not just stacked traits, but to just recombine things that patents have, expiring, and then you add on, and then you have another creation. So we need to have very, very strict, not just exclusion, because we have to continue to fight that there should not be patenting of seeds and life forms. We've been following the trend of patenting, and it is really moving very, very, very fast. And these are not inventions. They can't even pretend to be inventions. So the only way to make them legal is to go country by country, and then to use WIPO and regional IP offices in Africa and all over the world to harmonize new standards, to recreate the notion of what is an invention. So we need to fight that battle, but we also need to fight the battle to say, even if you are an invention, it has to be so strict. So what is the criteria? So we have to exclude as a first strategy and have such strict, honest, scientifically, legally based understanding of what is an invention and new, and then we have to close the door to that, all right? But that, we find, is not enough. Because what is happening now is the corporations are ruling in many, many, many different ways, and we all have seen that. I think that in what we're looking at, one of the biggest, in fact, the biggest continent of the battle now is Africa. Because Africa has some of the largest diversity of farmer seeds, and that is why we see this huge, huge interest in Africa, led by Monsanto. From the corporate point of view, it is Monsanto. Monsanto is the biggest player because they are the ones who own most of the seeds in that formal sector. But it is also the role of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I think every one of us in every area we work on, and I'm not just talking about agriculture, I'm talking about also in the area of health, in the area of education. Everywhere, the Gates Foundation comes up again and again and again. You're talking about a multi-trillion-dollar capitalized fund, which every year has to give out a few $1 billion to keep their tax-free status in the US. It is run by Wall Street and former Monsanto and other corporate guys. So we know that some of our colleagues are actually doing a lot of work to put together all this information, and that will be available soon. I just want to quickly mention why it is so scary, because right now the Gates Foundation is the biggest funder of the WHO. It is the biggest single funder of the WHO as a donor. And in FAO, it is increasing. And if you look at some of the information that is publicly available, in the last years, as of 2013, 12-13, they have given to the consultative group of International Agricultural Research Centers, CGIAR, $720 million. AGRA in Africa, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, more than $400 million. And the Gates Foundation, and I think Rockefeller Foundation, another one of the foundations, they sit on the board, okay? International organizations like the World Food Programme, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and the Committee of Food Security in the FAO, which is a very CSO-friendly committee. They've given more than $300 million to the international organizations. Universities and national research centers, our public research centers in agriculture, more than $600 million. NGOs, $669 million. More and more NGOs, especially the big development organizations, which have been working on food and small farmers' livelihoods, are now getting more and more money. So they won't be signing on to any call for no patents on life, and they will not be talking about trying to discipline intellectual property. So this is a big challenge for us. Within the NGO community, there will be more and more silencing. It's not just the genes that get silenced, but it's actually going to be NGOs who are going to be silenced. And what is the new modus operandi? Yes, they will continue to do the same thing. So we will have to fight TTIP. Because every time we win a battle, in Codex was very industry-oriented and controlled. But NGOs went in there to fight. Many of our colleagues sitting in this room as well, and those who are not here. We worked with governments to force them to turn up at Codex meetings. So in the last few years, we've got some really good things coming out of Codex in terms of risk assessment, low-level presence of GM contamination. And what do? When these become international standards and we don't like them, the United States takes the lead. And this is the biggest, of course, we know, as a government supporter and protector of corporations, is to go to the trade agreements. So, for example, in the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement that many of us have been fighting for years and years and years, and now we're so glad we're not alone because with TTIP, we have more friends fighting the same thing. But they are trying to introduce into the TPP, and so far a number of the countries have said no, but under a lot of pressure, an annex that looks at biotechnology products. And there it gives all the new rules under that agreement for low-level presence in GM contamination. It bypasses the Cartagena Protocol agreements. It bypasses the Codex guidance. It sets up standards that are very pro-industry. So this is and so far we've been resisting it, but it's not enough. And the secrecy of these trade agreements means that you cannot go into details unless you get the agreements. So we have governments who do consultations like we have in Malaysia. They assure us, don't worry, we will not sell out public health, we will not sell out our national interests, and we will have safeguards, blah, 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 blah. But until you see the details, we are not going to take any of this for granted. So breaking the secrecy is absolutely, absolutely important. And these trade agreements are very, very secret. And I want to do a bit of advertising here for Mariam, who has got this amazing, very important new publication about profiting from climate crisis and undermining resilience in Africa. It looks at the role of Monsanto and the Gates Foundation in this water-efficient maize for Africa. And this is the other big trend. Because of climate change, there is a huge hunt for drought tolerance genes. And we see it across the board from South America and, to Asia to Africa. And this is a very interesting business model, this WEMA, all right? And it's very, very dangerous because it's so well funded and it really doesn't work. It claims that it will reduce a bit of the yield loss, caused by drought. So from the science point of view and the productive point of view, it is very easy to knock it out. But it is there in a very systematic way in the last few years, well funded, where you have Monsanto coming in. That's the real company that's going to be profiting. But the Gates has gone to every country in the sub-Saharan, right? We have Kenya, Tanzania, South Africa, Mozambique, Uganda. They take over all our public research institutions and our germplasm, whatever that is left in the public domain, and they get access. And a couple of years ago, I happened to accidentally be put in touch with the Vice President of International Affairs of the Gates Foundation. And we were talking, and I said, okay, at some point I could not resist anymore. I said, I hear you have this new seed that you are working with Monsanto to bring to Africa. He said, yeah, we're very excited about that. Yeah, and then I said, well, how are you dealing with the issue of intellectual property? He said, actually one of the most difficult things in our negotiations with Monsanto is how to define what is a small farmer. Because we know the story about, in the BT cotton case, we're not take royalties from small farmers, right? So I sat there and I thought, this is really scary, all right? One company, one man who got all his profits from, monopoly, right, sets up a foundation to do philanthropy and has his Vice President of International Affairs say, we are deciding on the fate, basically, of African small farmers, right? Mariam, I'm sure, tell you more about this. But this is moving. It's moving and it's moving and it's moving. And we find them popping all over. And I think we need to look at the trends because what we have been talking a lot in the last few years about corporate capture. The direct company part, we know, because we can expose them. We can have campaigns, we can name companies. But what they're doing now is they're going through these foundations, which are giving a lot of legitimacy and funding. As public money is being cut on all areas, more and more money is coming from philanthropy, which means you cannot get a criticism or accountability. This is a big fight in the United Nations now in New York when we're looking at the post-2015 development agenda. Public-private partnerships is part of the game plan. This is the plan. It's very clear. We see PPPs across the board, all over, in every part of the UN. So taking over the UN is the next logical step after you take over the public sector of our national lives. Then it's very natural. So you have the EU especially, and I want to emphasize it because you're all European activists. The EU is very, very active in pushing for PPPs and wanting beyond that to even give more recognition to the business sector It has surrendered everything. So all the technology we want is in the business sector. More money is flowing from investments from the private sector. So that's where we need to have the harnessing. So this all. So you listen to Gates, and you listen to the EU, and you listen to many of the OECD governments. They sound exactly alike. Harness the innovation, the creativity, and the funding from the private sector. So this is a big thing going. And we are fighting. We are fighting against these PPPs. We are fighting for the responsibility of governments in the public interest. But it is a very tough fight. And the technology issue is absolutely important because the problem, which are all created by wrong technology and corporate control, we're now telling us the solution is more technology by the same people. Right? And so the fight over technology is very, very crucial, and we'll hear also about these so-called new technologies. And I think the big challenge for us fighting in this area is that they say, oh, no, those transgenics and cross species things, those are old-fashioned. We don't need all that now. We've got new technologies. And I think our point is that it is not different. It's more of the same, but the packaging and the legitimacy that they are seeking is very, very strong. Many countries, like in the United States and the EU, you have very strong, good anti-competition or antitrust or anti-combines laws. But do we see that being used? More than 40% is the threshold, before you kick in and investigate. Most of these companies are in 50, 60% of controls. But do we see any of the governments using the antitrust laws? No, we don't see that anymore. So there is a silencing as well of the laws. And the next thing to do through the trade agreements is to change all the laws that are good. So biosafety laws are called unjustifiable, burdensome, flawed by industry. And human rights for companies is increasing. But I don't want to end on a negative note, because I think one of the most important things in this meeting and others like this, which are coming up again and again in every region, shows that we will not give up. But we can only move if we have this partnership, in this real, genuine partnership of science, knowledge, law, policy, activism, communities, peoples. Because we really need to really fight that. And I think some of the new ways that where they are trying to even strengthen their control, like the trade agreements and investment agreements, are giving us an opportunity politically to bring knowledge back for debate. And we really need to do that. At the same time, the search and the patenting of natural genes and plants and all that, and fruits and vegetables is increasing tremendously. And we have been a little bit not so active in the work against patents. I think we need to do that. But patents is not the only thing to look at, because the whole spread of information to become trade secret, private information, business information has grown and grown and grown. So secrecy is the order of the day if you want to maintain corporate rule. And using philanthropy as your front in legitimacy is also a very clever way of doing it, especially when the philanthropy comes in the first place from business profits, which is unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jörgling, for giving us the philanthropy agenda. I was supposed to talk a little bit about trends in industrial agricultural policy, and quite a bit of it has been said already, so I can stick to my time, I hope. I've identified 3 trends I would like to briefly talk about. The first one is what I would call, don't use the G word anymore. Don't talk about genetic engineering, even if you do it. Don't talk about genetically modified organisms. Talk about cisgenetics, talk about gene editing, talk about improved and speeded up evolutionary breeding technologies. Blur the question of what we are really talking about. That is one obvious trend. But behind this trend, I think, is also something that we should not forget. Genetic engineering, the old-fashioned way, simply did not really work very well. The cut-and-paste approach to organisms, to life, did not prove to be much speedier, much more efficient, whatever. When you look at, and you all know this, at the situation of genetic engineering products successful on the market these days, it is just a handful of them. Despite the fact that billions have been invested now since 25 years in this technology, I have rarely seen a technology performing so poorly as the genetic engineering technology. But at the same time, obviously our knowledge has improved enormously. And I think we should be careful when we look at the situation. For me as a layman, and Christoph Ten will explain all this in much more detail in a minute, and later on in a full hour of a workshop, the switch, the new trend is going away from cut and paste, from an intrusive type of technology, to what we have always demanded, trying to understand what is happening. The level of trying to understand is, at this moment, in very many cases, identify a piece of DNA that you would like to have in this organism. Synthesize it, produce a primer of it, and then go search for it in nature. And yes, indeed, most of the things we believe are so inventive already exist in nature since long. Also, our initial concept, our narrative of how dangerous, how complicated, how unnatural it would be to transfer genes from one organism to another. Well, 25 years later, we are much smarter. We understand that most of the DNA we are talking about is in our organisms, be it mammals, be it plants, whatever. It's just deactivated. It is not the trans and then the cis as the benign type of genetic engineering, the transgenic or cisgenic topic. It is the question of how this level is manipulated. And over the past years, I think also what had been a weird, strange concept of epigenetics, something that those genetic engineering opponents came up with and nobody really understood what it is, today is big business. Epigenetics, the control mechanisms in the cell beyond the DNA level, is where we understand most of the interesting processes actually happen, and it is not necessarily controlled by DNA in the old-fashioned way. I think it is interesting to note that despite the fact that the scientific community, but also the industry, have long given up this original dogma of DNA makes RNA makes protein, when you look at the logic of what is being patented, in this area, still, a very old-fashioned, long falsified dogma is still the ruling idea, the ruling narrative of why you would claim private ownership on this type of A leads to B mechanism. The second trend I am observing is described as sustainable intensification. I wouldn't say a good friend of mine, but somebody with whom we have worked in very many different contexts. Professor Jules Pretty developed this idea of sustainable intensification as a very smart concept, actually. Yes, we need intensification in terms of getting more out of given resources, especially land in the first place. But then the question is, what do we intensify? So far, intensification basically meant put in more fossil fuel products. Fertilizer, pesticides, whatever. That meant intensification. Now he said, well, we could also intensify the labor. We could also intensify the smartness of the inputs. We could also intensify the symbiotic agroecological input intensity. Sustainable intensification these days, you will hear it from each and every of those big players we have heard. Monsanto wants sustainable intensification. Syngenta really wants sustainable intensification. The word, which I found smart at the beginning, has been completely expropriated and used in the old-fashioned way. Sustainable intensification today simply means let's continue intensification, but call it sustainable. In some cases, I think, and this is important to note for us, this is true. I think the agro-industry has learned a lot about more careful use of scarce resources. And it is not just window shopping or an excuse. It is a deep belief of many CEOs of these companies, and it is enshrined now in the conceptual basics of those companies. Yes, we have to be more resource efficient, more drop per crop. But more drop per crop has changed its narrative also. It is no longer more crop per drop in order to feed the world. This has been pushed a little bit away, and you probably noticed that the official number of hungry has constantly decreased over the past 3 years, mainly, one should mention, due to changed standards and concepts of what a hungry person constitutes, developed at the Excel sheets in Rome at the FAO, not so much in terms of really fighting hunger where it hurts. One of the biggest achievements in fighting hunger was to decide that the majority of hungry people actually led what is called the so-called sedentary lifestyle. So they did not really need 2,000 kilocalories per day as so far conceptualized, but 1,700 would do the thing. That decreases hunger immediately if you change the number in the Excel sheet. The other major improvement was also to say if a person goes hungry only 3 or 4 months before the next harvest and is not properly hungry for the rest of the year, then we do not count him as a hungry in our statistics as we did before. That also decreased the number of hungry in the world substantially. A new trend I see, which is also progress, I want to underline it is progress, is that we are no longer talking just about the calorie hunger, but much more about nutrition. Hidden hunger is the new buzzword, the new trendy word around the world, and that describes that you can be actually obese and at the same time suffer from deficiency in certain micronutrients and therefore be a victim of hidden hunger and not so hidden over consumption at the same time. This is the problem of our industrialized societies. This is the problem especially in the United States, and it is a new divide between the rich and the poor. The poor are affected not only by the hidden hunger, but in many cases at the same time by obesity and overconsumption. There is a trend now to also talk about scarcities beyond feeding the world. You probably followed the debate about this. The new president of the FAO publicly admitted that with the amount of food we produce today, we could feed 12 billion people. Substantially more than we even expect in our worst dreams to ever become on this planet. The new scarcity is the scarcity of a post-fossil raw materials commodity approach. It was really a burning issue over the past 3 years, and it has seen a substantial blow now with the decline of the oil price. Bioeconomy, and that's the new trend, is closely related to the energy price. There is a new price for a hectare of land, and that price is how many barrels of oil can I replace from this hectare of land. If people who want to feed from this hectare of land cannot pay this price, especially in Africa, but also in other regions of the world, they will probably not get the goods from this hectare. With the decline of the oil price, obviously many of the new bioeconomy approaches of using land for energy, transport, and similar production has seen a substantial blow. Here in Germany, 1/5 of the entire cropland is now dedicated to energy and fuel production. At the same time, we import enormous amounts of hectares from outside Europe to come up for this. There has been an interesting debate about the eco-efficiency of biofuels. Everybody agrees now that it is not smart in the sense of fighting climate change to feed our cars from the land. But there is a strong lobby now, for instance, here in Germany, defending the rights of those who have invested in good faith by the promises of the governments into biofuel and especially into biogas production. That's the bigger thing here in Germany. It has developed its own life. And this bioeconomy trend will not go away. It is one of the biggest investment chunks of the latest European research program, Horizon 2020. It is one of the new frontiers, that's how the governments see it, to be at the leading edge of new developments and new technologies in this bioeconomy context. Don't use the A word is the last concept and the last trend I would like to mention. Don't talk about agroecology. Agroecology, I think, is at this moment the term where we would all agree that's our vision. That's the common vision of how we should develop agriculture in a scarce situation. That's the vision how we should make better use of the diversity instead of monocultures. That's the vision also of how to keep more people on the land and make the work on the land, which is necessary and cannot be replaced by whatever technology we are talking about, be it computers or synthetic biology or whatever, to make this work guarantee a living for the people who do it. And I think this is the perspective that we probably want to defend. And I'd like to ask you to watch out by when Syngenta, they are usually a little smarter and faster than Monsanto in these contexts, will start talking about agroecology as their leading concept. Being I would call it mature campaign now, the GMO-free movement implies to have massive successes. We should beware of becoming a threat from our successes. The way the successes show are not always nice. We had the meeting yesterday, and when an 80,000 hectare agricultural enterprise says, we want to go GMO-free, some of us feel like, oh, is this the success we have been dreaming of? And yes, it is still success. And we should beware of a trap many mature campaigns went into, which is to then think, if I am successful, I must have done something wrong. When I get into the government, I must have given up my principles. When my ideas become a good business opportunity, these are no longer good ideas. Beware of that. I think we have to face the success as a challenge and maintain our good cooperation, our open-mindedness, and live with our success, and then we can really turn it into what I would call our joint agroecological vision. Thank you. Going back into the moderator's mode. It is now my pleasure to introduce Elizabeth Bravo to you, who comes to us from Ecuador, but she is actually representing a network that stretches all across Latin America. And one thing that also stretches all across Latin America, or most of Latin America, is the Soya Republic and its glyphosate ingredient. And Elizabeth will give us a first flavor of what we will be looking at in more detail later again. Thank you, Elizabeth, for having you here today. You want to use this?
Okay, thank you for the invitation. I want to begin saying that I am from Ecuador, which is the first country who, by constitution, was declared a GMO-free country. But it's not easy to keep this situation. Besides that, I am going to talk the tragedy of especially South America, and especially the so-called South Cone. Can we have the next? In this map, we can see that the area with the faster growing of GE crops is South America. The first producer is United States, followed by Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, Bolivia, and Uruguay. This area concentrates 33% of the global area cultivated with GE crops. Next one, please. 53 million hectares is only RR soya with resistance to glyphosate. So when I heard that the old-fashioned GMO crops are over, I said, well, just see what is happening in Latin America. The next crop is corn with 5.6 million hectares. And next is cotton with 1.1 hectares, which represent almost 2% of the cultivated area. The first country is Brazil. This is the information from ICA AAA, which the dates are not so correct. They put that Brazil have 40 million hectares with G crops, but we beginning to do some calculations. It's not possible to be so huge, but this is what this organization said. In any case, about 40 million hectares in Brazil are cultivated with DG crops, followed by Argentina, 24.4 million hectares, Paraguay 3.6, Uruguay 1 million, and Uruguay is 1.5. In the case of Bolivia, and especially Uruguay is a small country. So the percentage of area with especially soya is very big. Most of the crops in the South Cone are resistant to glyphosate. the most majority. And which are the impacts of this model? The first one is a huge, huge health problem. Then we have land grabbing. The model of crops with resistance to glyphosate or to any herbicides promote land grabbing, and we are going to see later why. Then we have destruction of natural areas, destruction of the food local systems of production, and environmental degradation. To begin with the health issue, we see that when we talk about GMOs, usually they say that GMOs are good because they reduce the use of pesticides. But what we've seen is that Brazil have become the first pesticide consumers in the world. And mainly it's because of, with the introduction of the soya resistant crops. In the year 2010, they sprayed over the country 1 billion liters of glyphosate, of pesticides. Most of it is glyphosate and is for the RR soya bean. Argentina, they sprayed 450 million liters of agrotoxics in general, 2 million of glyphosate over the people, over the country, over the birds, over the plants. What are the main health problems? About 12 million people live in the buffer area of GE plantations in the South Cone. They receive millions of liters of glyphosate for every planting seasons. So there is a lot of epidemiological problems, like the levels of diseases like cancer, leukemia, malformations, is very huge. For instance, this data show that for every 10,000 newborn childs, 35 have malformations, which is much above the world average. Next one, please. This is a study done by a group of mothers in one area in Argentina. And they make his own inventory of disease of the people, no? They begin to realize that the woman in this neighborhood, very urban area, surrounded by soya crops, they begin to have in the hair hats because they were suffering cancer. So they begin to say what's going on in the area, and they found out every dot here is one person with cancer. In the population of 5,000 people, they found 161 cases of cancer in the population. But they also found lupus, thyroid problems, leukemia, and other diseases related with pesticides. Next one, please. Another study in Argentina found that from 139 infants analyzed, 52 have malformations associated with agrochemicals. And additionally, they found 34 miscarriages. Also, in another area in Chaco, Argentina, they found that from 4,255 newborn infants, 157, it is 3.6% have malformations. All is related with pesticides. In relation with land grabbing, Benny said, talk about the United Republic of Soya. This map is a Syngenta map. And was advertised in a program that Syngenta have in the area, and they said soya doesn't have borders. And it give the name of the United Republic of Soya because due to the very high cost of the machinery, seeds, and the facilitation that the crop with resistance to herbicides produce to have huge areas. Because when you have a monocrop, the main problems are weeds. And the main cost to have a monoculture is to eradicate the weeds, because you had to do by hand. Because you use pesticides, the soya will also die because it's herb. But if you have a plant which is resistant to the pesticide, so then the plant is not going to die, so you can use aerial spray. This is the big advantage of these crops. But in order to do aerial spray, you need huge areas. You cannot do aerial spray if you have here soya, here corn, here rice. So it promotes land grabbing. So the situation we have in the South Cone is, first, the minimum area to be profitable is 500 hectares. So the people in this area live from renting the land. Most of the producers are not, they are landless. The biggest producer of soya in Argentina said, I am a landless. The only thing I have is knowledge. So what he's doing is renting areas every day and controlling huge areas. One person can control 200,000 hectares. So they have aerial spraying, and also they use these machines for no-till agriculture, and they can work many hectares without farmers. They have technicians. The idea of agriculture with farmers is not longer a possibility here. They have only technicians in a car with conditioner air, and the satellite tells you how much nitrogen used, how much glyphosate put, how many seed plant, and so on. So it's not agriculture at all. Another problem is in some cases the producers are foreigners. Next one, please. And see, I can move this. Thank you. Yeah, one problem, big problem is Paraguay. No? The main producers of soya in Paraguay are Brazilians, and where they put the plantations, mainly in indigenous or peasant areas, and this process has been taking place with a lot of violence. In this photograph, we have it's a map where we see all these like yellow area are the area with soya. The green areas is the remaining of forest, and the dots are the executions related with land struggle in Paraguay. So we can see that this model is producing a lot of violence. Another impact is the destruction of the natural areas. We see this map, the evolution of the forest in Paraguay in 1930 until 2009, and we have seen how the natural forests have disappeared almost. And in Brazil, the expansion of soya, we see in the north is the Amazon. So the Amazon is being replaced by soya with the destruction of this, the most richest forest in the world. Also, another problem is the substitution of crops for food security and food sovereignty to produce soya for exportation, to produce meat air wells. In this area, because they are flat lands, they used to produce a lot of meat, cows, and now they produce food for cows which are being produced elsewhere. And the producing of food for the people is not longer the case, and the fact is that they have even to import food. And the result is occupation of is a transnationalization of the area. So if we see, for instance, the basin of the Paraná River, we see how many plants of Cargill, ADM, Monsanto, the corporations who are in biofuels, Repsol, and so on, are occupying the area. The people are the minimum part of this area. all occupied by the corporations, and is a real transformation of the territory. It's an occupation of the territory. It's not just the crops, it's all the transformation plants, it's all the ports to export to Europe or to China and so on. This is a map of the presence of Cargill in Paraguay. All the white dots are the plants of Cargill. So, the question is, which are the future of these childs? These childs are indigenous in Paraguay who live in a community, and next door to them is a plantation of a Brazilian of soya, which is being sprayed and so on. So we ask, which is the future of these childs? If we take into account that in the South Cone, in Argentina and Brazil, they have just accepted the two 4G resistant crops. And if we think that glyphosate is bad, and glyphosate has produced the impacts in the health and the environment that we have seen, we don't want to think which is going to be the impact of these new crops. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. We will go into the entire glyphosate question in much more detail in the workshops again. And now the last presentation will come from Christoph Tin. Where is he? Cheers. Hello. Our expert for new technology questions. It's been mentioned a couple of times. Here comes the guy who will tell us all about the new technologies. You want the controller? Thank you.
Thank you very much. It will take me 2 hours to explain my subject. I will present it in best Bavarian English I can. So let's try. So, So this is a chimera. It's something in between the old technology and the new technology. We called it Smart Stacks Plus because there is already one genetically engineered maize on the market in Europe for import and usage in food and feed, which is called Smart Stacks. It produces 6 different insecticidal toxins and is resistant to glyphosate. And this now has 6 insecticidal toxins, pt proteins, combined in one maize, and is resistant to 4 groups of herbicides. So this is the, let's say, top of evolution of the old GMOs. It's grown in the US. It's been applied for authorization for import also to Europe. And here you see already it's not natural, it's not old genetic engineering only. It also implies already some synthetic toxin, which is no longer derived from bacteria, but is derived from DNA composed from various bacteria to have a more stronger toxin to be more efficient. So this is a product which is already on the market and might be authorized for Europe. And we should, when we now discuss about new technologies, we not should only think about crops. We also should think about animals. And here you have the old school genetic engineering animal, the pig, which is growing bigger, but never made it to the market because they were ill. We have the salmon, which is about to be authorized in the US and Canada for the market, which grows 8 times faster. And we have for already applied for experimental release in Europe 2 years ago, fruit fly or olive fly from UK company Oxitec, which is a new class of genetically engineered animals. These animals are not supposed to be kept in a stall in agriculture. They are supposed to fly around, spread in the environment to survive even. The males of these olive flies will survive forever. As long as there are other olive flies around, they can propagate. And the genome of this olive fly is composed of various DNA. It stems from marine organisms, from bacteria, from other insects, and from viruses. So this kind of new organism can also not derive from genetically engineering, which was used so far. Take a piece of DNA, transfer it. This is already synthetic biology, as you call it, but as a transgenic organism of next order, which are high likelihood to escape into the environment without any control. So this is the technology behind, the most relevant, I think. You could say the future is now, what we always did not want to have into the agriculture field, at least, is now some kind of reality. You not only can sequence DNA from existing organisms very, very fast, and whole organisms are sequenced a lot already. You have the whole genome of several organisms meanwhile. This would be up here. You can analyze it, you can sequence it. But as soon as you have the data on the computer, you can also resynthesize it in the laboratory. So it's no longer so you have to take it out of an organism. You can do it artificially in the laboratory. And you can do it in large amount. Costs went down dramatically last years, and the length of the DNA increased dramatically. And meanwhile, we have some organisms which have a completely synthesized genome. It's a bacteria, somehow, a microorganism, which was presented by Frank Venter, which is living on a synthesized DNA. So this is already possible, and of course it's not only be applied in medicine, it's also to be applied in agriculture. And these are the technologies, the names of it, some of it, which are relevant. One is oligonucleotides, which I will explain a little bit. It's small pieces of synthetic DNA derived from a laboratory to be inserted into cells to convince the cell to change its genome. I will try to explain in a picture. Nucleases, these are also called gene swissers. You can target any place in the cell, meanwhile, make a cut. This would be a knockout function. You silence the gene by knocking it out. You take it off, you just cut it. And the other one is knock in on the place where the gene swisser is located then in the genome. You also can insert any synthetic DNA derived from the laboratory, be it from natural resources or just artificial DNA, doesn't matter. You can do it quite efficiently in laboratory animals already, and it's also been shown that you can do it in all kind of organisms, which are also relevant for agriculture. And then I already mentioned, or Benny already mentioned, you can interfere with epigenetics, with the genome regulation, much more efficient than before. You can do gene silencing, you can do gene enhancement in organisms without changing the DNA, and you can insert whole chromosomes or genomes into organisms. And something which is derived from these nucleases, which is just a one cut on one certain target in the cell. You can have this as a mutagenic chain reaction, means you once insert it into an organism and then it spreads in the organism, takes over control on the other chromosome. So in the end, the genetic information will spread even in next generation. Homozygotes, let's say they are having much more of the artificial gene than it would be the case if it would be transferred to the next generation by natural mechanisms. I show you in a picture. My English is too lousy for this. So on the pictures, this is these oligonucleotides. You see a small piece of DNA is being inserted into the cell. It aligns with the original DNA, and then nobody knows exactly how enzymes come or whatever. And then the cell, made from a plant, thinks that this is the original best DNA they should use, and they change their own genetic information by methods not really known. And this is applied to, for example, for plants to make them resistant against herbicides. You can only change a very small piece of DNA by this method. Only small pieces of this artificial DNA are accepted. But as a pioneer in synthetic biology tells us, Mr. George Church from the US, which is really a hero in synthetic biology, says if you do it several times, you can change the whole genome by genome editing. And the example he uses in a book he published in 2012, is changing the genome of an Homo sapiens, but we are Homo sapiens, to the genome of Neanderthal, which is something else. And this could be done by genome editing using similar method like this, small pieces of DNA being inserted several times to change several parts of the genome or to turn an elephant into the genome of a mammoth. All same technology with some details. And these are the gene scissors. It's composed of an area which finds the right target sequence in the genome, and then an enzyme is there which cuts the genome, and you can use it also for insertion of additional genetic information, knock in, knock out, silence a gene or put a new gene in. And the word used for it is clustered, etc. I can't remember it, I can't keep it in my mind. It's CRISPR, that's the most efficient gene scissor at the moment. And of course, this kind of of phrasing, of wording, is also supposed to confuse public and to disable public from taking a sound, educated discussion on it, because nobody really knows what I'm talking about when I just say to you, do you know the latest version of CRISPR-Cas? You would say, never heard about it, don't know what you're saying. But this is a very powerful technology, and maybe we have to just use words like nucleases or gene scissors in the end. This is the one which is most promising for companies like Monsanto or Syngenta to change also crops. And latest technology detail I want to show you is this mutageneous chain reaction. You once insert this nucleases, this gene scissor, and then it starts like a reaction in the cell and takes over also the chromosome, which is not genetically engineered, by its own potential. So it starts life for its own, it starts spreading the genetic information within the genome, and end result, for example, on its being tested on insects, you will have a large population in the environment that is being, which is inheriting this new genetic information in a much quicker, much shorter period of time than it would be the case if it would be inherited naturally. And it's just a publication from 2015, Ganz and Beer. And they say, well, now maybe we need a new conference to think about moratorium, but we see many of scientists meanwhile mentioning that some years ago, 30 years ago, we had a moratorium, but I doubt that they really will make it this time. There are too much economic interest in the field already, and I doubt that this will be put on hold just by the scientists themselves. I think it needs some interference with civil society. And it was already mentioned, these new technologies also have a political dimension. They are used to circumvent regulation. You can see, for example, in the US, organisms without any detailed risk assessment are already on the market. This is a publication from 2013, which says, for example, here you have the technologies. This is a nuclease, simple similar like CRISPR, or epigenetics. You also have this gene gang, or these old methods, and all these organisms are not supposed to be registered at GMOs in the US, but to come to the market without being classified or examined as a GMO. And so this also starts now in Europe. We have now this Cybus oilseed rape. It's being produced by oligonucleotide technologies, and the German authorities already say now this is no longer genetic engineering. This does not need to be regulated. This can be grown everywhere. And this is, of course, a huge scandal, just because, of course, it is genetic engineering. We'll discuss it in the workshop. And on the other hand, if you have oilseed rape in Europe, you never will get rid of it again. This can spread this herbicide resistance into the fields, and you do not have any possibility to control it and to take it back. And this was already mentioned. This is the Olifly from Oxitec. And there are also new companies. I think it's my last example, and then I come to my conclusions. Okay. New companies like Interexon, you should maybe a little bit monitor it. On the board of Interexon, we have old guys from Monsanto, which are sitting there in the management. Just country lost his name, but so this is, let's say, some Monsanto in a new way, you could say. They bought all cloning companies which do cloning on livestock. They bought the Arctic apple, which is a new apple being introduced in the US market, supposed not to stay longer fresh, in a fresh way. They have the Aqua Bounty company, which wants to sell the transgenic salmon, which are introduced in the previous slide. And they also had one of the spearhead in synthetic biology. This is from their own understanding. They provide for agricultural products, even biotechnology, technology which allows control over the function and output of any living cells. And that's what they do. They even file patents on genetically engineered chimpanzees. So this is a quite interesting company with a quite interesting technology. And that's my last slide. Very generally, we need to protect biodiversity and future of adaptability of biodiversity, of evolution. And of course, we need control. We should not release anything which we have not controlled, to take it back from the environment, to retrieve it. And of course, we have to know about the risk. So we need registration. We need to have risk assessment. We need to have transparency. And this also means we would need more independent risk assessment. If we try to work with this technology, we need much stronger independent risk assessment, much more experts not being just paper industry, being obliged to secrecy, cooperation, publications, but really to work independently. And of course, we would need much more possibilities for civil society to interfere with the process on early stage. Thank you very much.